Hi, welcome to Governance Bites. I'm Mark Banicevich, and today it's my absolute pleasure to spend some time with the Laird. Thank you very much, David, for spending some time with me today.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure.
So David is an absolute legend in the financial services industry in New Zealand, even though his last executive role was as Managing Director of AIA in Australia. So that was a little while ago, I think, before I met you, wasn't it?
Possibly, yeah.
And since then, been in governance roles and as chairs a couple of boards, just came off the chair of Lifetime Group, currently the chair of Strategi, also on the board of Prudential, another insurer, and a lot of boards around the financial services industry. So a wealth of experience both in executive management and also in governance. So thank you very much for your time, David.
Not a problem, Mark.
Now the conversation that we're going to have today is very much around right-sizing governance for an entity. So let's set the framework for that conversation with me asking you, what are the functions of governance?
It's a good question. Prefacing these remarks with my experience being exclusively in financial services. So, although the questions are generic, the responses are definitely traceable back to the financial services industry. But essentially, governance is, in its simplest form, is there to ensure that the entity that is trading is doing so with a purpose, the why. It's got the function of having the company trading legally within the parameters of the various acts that govern. And in that context, experience would say that there are many directors out there who believe that some of the legislation doesn't apply to them because, well, I'm just a one-man band, kind of small, you don't bother with me. No, you're subject to the Companies Act and the Privacy Act and the Health and Safety Act, and in financial services terms, the FMCA and FISLAG, COFI and all the rest of the issues. So the functions of governance in its elementary state is really to keep a framework of why the company exists, what it does within the permitted parameters, and ultimately, if it's managed properly, one of the major functions from my perspective is to add value to the enterprise. Because from experience, if you're looking to realise the capital value of your enterprise, the first thing that anyone who's going to express an interest in acquisition will look at is the minutes, and they'll look at the constitution, and they'll look at all the formal documentation that you've created, and that will be relevant in proportion to the size and scale and scope of the enterprise. So the Class 1 licensees, for example, in financial services terms, they don't need to have a full board of directors. There's a misapprehension, I think, kicking around. But you do need to have some way of recording how you made decisions, why you made decisions, what the logic behind them was there research conducted or of any substance, and have it recorded, documented and available for review, inspection and affirmation. I don't suspect the FMA will be looking at everyone's, but if you made the assumption that the regulator will be looking at some stage at what I've done in the governance space, then A, the guide that the FMA put out around governance is very useful, and B, it's best to assume it is going to happen. That way you're prepared for the worst and you're ready for the best.
Right, so you referred to a Class 1 licence holder, which is a financial advice business with one financial advisor and generally an owner-manager.
Yep.
And so a nice point that you raised there was it doesn't matter how small your business is, even if you're the only person in the company, you're still a director of a company and you have governance obligations.
Yes.
The right sizing of that governance, which we'll get onto, is very different. But it's still very valuable to have some documentation around your business, recording how you do things, and when you're spending time thinking about your business, writing those things down, recording them. And not only for a regulated industry where someone like the Financial Markets Authority can come in and knock on your door, but for a less regulated industry, it still has value, as you say. If you're looking to sell the business, someone else can step in and look at that documentation and look at the minutes of what you've written for your governance time, and use that to help establish the value of the business that they're willing to pay.
Yep. And I think to that extent, a lot of organisations, however small or large they are, just like a computer's got an operating system, your business needs an operating system. And it needs a structure and a framework and a discipline that is easily accessed, easily recorded, easily understood. It has a clear definition of what the vision is for this organisation. Why am I doing this? It's not just to make $1 million or whatever, but there's a function there that has, meaning to you as an individual, an entrepreneur, if you like, and that you've got the data properly structured and recorded that you're working with, that you've got the right people in the right seats. Even if you're a one-man band, you need to have some form of support services in that space, and that all the issues that you come across are dealt with in an appropriate fashion, and that you've got this cadence, if you like, within a framework of discipline that goes all the way from the original founder of the organisation right through to however large an entity you become. Mm-hmm. But that same framework is in space. Just as your computer is an operating system, you need an operating system for your company.
Absolutely.
At board level as well.
Now, you mentioned earlier that it's not necessary for particularly smaller companies to have a board of directors. What are the alternatives for a smaller business to afford?
Yeah, I think the directions for the smaller entities in this market where complexities prevail, and they grow more and more complex, whichever government we seem to be working with. It doesn't seem to be a retreat from rules and regulations and legislative and what have you. That's the market we're operating in. That's reality, and it's unrealistic to expect any individual in the director's position to know everything all the time that is necessary. Mm-hmm. We know you can't trade insolvent, you can't pay dividends insolvent, you've got to be able to pay your bills, etc., etc. Those are basics. But when it becomes more complex in terms of investment capabilities or mortgage lending capabilities, where you have to have qualifications, the time becomes a bonus. It's therefore appropriate to consider looking at having third-party advisors, and that could be an advisory board.
Yes.
It is not appointing your best mate to look out for your interests. It's having a properly constituted formula within your organisation to say that I'm going to appoint an advisory board where the expertise and the objectivity will be paramount. In other words, a pair of eyes looking at what I'm doing as the operator of the company that is critical, it is interrogative, it's examining the rationale, and it's basically a set of checks and balances to make sure that I'm on the right track. Now, an advisory board doesn't have to meet every month. In fact, neither does a full governance board, but to the extent that you need to have some form of commercial relationship to make it appropriate, you need to contemplate having a set of objectives for your advisory board, having a set of operating and rules for them to work with, and you need to contemplate remuneration of some description to make it appropriate, so that there is a value for them and a value for you. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't cost you anything, it has no value. So, to that extent, I think step one would be an advisory board. Excuse me. You may well morph into something more serious and more complex and more formal at a later date. But having that external views from trusted advisors can be a godsend.
Would you think there's value in a very small business starting out with maybe one or two business mentors that they work with before stepping into an advisory board?
For sure. If you're a startup, that's definitely the case. There are lots of folk like me kicking around, and you, Mark. And to be fair, the product providers in this market they have a vested interest in making sure that there are new recruits into the industry, yes, and to help them along the way. And the product providers have got deeper pockets than any of us. So to that extent, where there is guidance and business development management available, then it would be certainly recommended that
take advantage
of it, without necessarily selling your soul.
Yes.
But there are organisations in the land that have got reliable, dependable, and substantial support for you. And there are others that are less so, but that's just a matter of value judgment. So to that extent, my view has always been, particularly since the advent of coffee, that the advice industry and the product provision industry need to have a closer relationship, not exclusive, but closer, in order that they can collaborate for the benefit of the consumer at the outcome. We have different drivers and different pressures, but nevertheless, the consumer is the ultimate beneficiary of our efforts, so we should be working more closely together, particularly in that mentoring stage.
And even in other industries, there are the same sorts of organisations available, whether it's larger customers that you're dealing with or suppliers, or potentially you've got entities like Business Mentors New Zealand.
Yes.
There are, the business.govt.nz has a wealth of resources available. So there's a lot of stuff out there to reach for.
Yeah.
So given those different structures that we've discussed, how does the role of a director differ with those different structures?
Well, I think the easiest or the most immediate definition or delineation, is between the not-for-profits and the for-profits. I'm deputy chair at Foundation North as well, which is one of the larger philanthropic organisations in the land, and clearly the objectives that we have to aspire to are different from those, say, at Partners or Lifetime or whatever. The not-for-profits in this context, were Foundation set up as a putia of 1.6 billion, which we have to maintain in perpetuity. Then it's real value.
Yes.
And then hand out, I think last year we handed out 71 million in grants and support for the community in Te Tai Tokerau, which is where the charter limits the operation.
Area.
So from that perspective, the functions are slightly different because the objectives are slightly different. Therefore, the skill sets within the board have to be slightly different and tailored to the requirements of the charter and the government's intent. In the private sector, clearly you have to have a sustainable organisation, and sustainable usually means that your income exceeds your expenditure, at least for the long term. And in that respect, it's again tailoring the requirements of the board along the particular lines of the enterprise that you are undertaking. There are wealth management practices in New Zealand that really have no interest in risk management. Therefore, there's no point in hiring someone who's got risk management background.
Right.
I think one of the fallacies, particularly in financial services, that anyone who's got experience in commerce will be a good director. I just don't think that's the case now. Maybe years back it might have been, but now there's just far too many loopholes and far too many obstacles in terms of the complexities around legislative, regulatory, and the interaction amongst players in this market requires someone that needs to have the industry background.
Yes.
And experience to add value, to add proper value to a board. Now, they may have experience in distribution, they may have experience in marketing or actuarial or whatever, but that again is a nuance in terms of what the company itself is looking for at the time.
The skills it requires at the time.
And those skill sets may change over
as the strategy changes and so forth.
Absolutely.
Right, as the environment changes.
Yeah.
So how do the governance procedures differ with advisory boards versus mentors versus governance boards?
Yeah, I think the basic procedures are broadly similar. They have to have some form of structure around them, and that simply means an agenda and minutes.
Yes.
And if those are actually accurate, reliable, and they don't need to be verbatim, that's for sure, and you need to be careful about what you actually say in the minutes because they're discoverable in the event of any litigation. So, but those documents, those recordings of what you said during this meeting where decisions are being taken, it's important for you to be able to, as the director, to be able to do that, all the way up to an organisation such as Lifetime or Partners, where their strategic decisions need to be, accurately recorded.
Yes.
Because we are in an environment and an age when the regulator has the right to access these documents and to prove that the organisation is being run in a fit and proper manner, and that the board of directors are fit and proper for the functions being carried out. And nothing evidences that better than the procedures that are recorded in the minutes and preceded by the agenda. So in its very elemental sense, the even a one-page narrative of the class one-man director type, why did we do this in the recent past, what have we done, and what are we intending to do, that in itself is a perfectly adequate record for anyone's purposes. When you get to the Lifetime and the DIMS licence and accountancy practices and fire in general and all these different income streams as a client servicing organisation, that complexity naturally requires more detail and more.
And also, as the organisation gets larger, you'll get more separation of who's doing the job. So as you suggest, a one-person band writing some notes based on an agenda so that they're really thorough is enough. But when you start getting up to a governance board level, the board needs board papers because they're not involved in the day-to-day. And as you say, the minutes will be a little bit more precise and a little bit more accurate. So yes, the structure of how information comes to the board, how the board make decisions will change based on the complexity of the organisation.
Absolutely, Mark. Yeah, that's it.
Right.
Yep.
So another little topic that we wanted to get onto is around the rights of shareholders, because particularly around privately held companies, they get to the level of maturity where they might get an advisory board in place or a governance board, which is more formal in terms of its rights and its obligations. And you often get the shareholders then stepping back into that business saying, no, do it like this. So can shareholders, what are the rights of shareholders, and can they direct the decisions of the board?
Well, I guess it depends on the shareholding structure. One of the prominent organisations, it's now a fairly large Kiwi saver provider, I can remember its original evolution, was deemed by the founder to be successful because he managed to keep the shareholders away from the operational activity of the organisation for a couple of years at least, and the company took off. It's obviously an issue that the directors have to consider where there are major shareholders, and that's usually defined in the constitution as what is major. In some cases, there's been constitutions written where a major shareholder is guaranteed a seat on the board.
Yes.
And that has implications, whether it's an executive director or a non-executive director that's present, and the influence of shareholders in organisations where there's a major shareholding can give rise to potential conflicts of interest, and because there will be occasions when the company's best interests and the shareholders' best interests are not 100% aligned. For example, the executive directors may recommend investment in a system which prevents the distribution of a dividend, and the shareholder may have counted on that dividend distribution, and there has to be a reconciliation of the interests there.
And of course the directors have the duty to act in the best interests of the entity,
yes, they do.
Not in the best interest of the shareholders, which if you're talking about a major shareholder or even a majority shareholder, that suggests there are other shareholders, and the shareholder can't come in and make decisions based on their own interests. They've got to make decisions in the interest of the company, which represents all of the shareholders.
Yes, exactly. Right. And I think I'm not talking out of turn, but in my past experiences managing director of AI Australia, where it was at that time a wholly owned subsidiary of AIG, based in New York. AIG's prime direction was to benefit shareholders.
their shareholders.
There was very little consideration given to the policyholders, if I can say, in relation to the shareholding a benefit. So, and that's probably a historic evolution that grew up out of the States, where in those days there was still an executive chairman, which is now, since the Cadbury report, largely been done away with. The functions have been separated, but in those days the shareholders' interests were paramount.
Yes.
And maintaining a steady growth in the share price gave rise to some smoothing of results, which ultimately gave rise to some investigations from the SEC. But that aside, in New Zealand context, organisations will frequently have a cornerstone shareholder. And if that cornerstone shareholder is also a source of capital, then you have to be careful that you are not seen to be serving the interests of that shareholder, particularly if there's a disjoint between the horizon of the shareholding cornerstone investor and the intentions and objectives and strategic objectives of the company. So obviously in listed companies the shareholder participation is different, and we're in an era of shareholder democracy, and we've seen some CEOs and some boards and some proposals from boards being voted out or voted down.
And you've got activist shareholding. That happens these days too.
Look, I'm not necessarily against that at all, but I think there has to be some sort of reasonable balance between the casual shareholder who has no knowledge of the operational activity of the organisation and the cloak of, or the veil, corporate veil that they talk about in the past, where everything's done behind closed doors and no one else knows what's happening. So there has to be a balance in transparency and understanding, so that there isn't destructive conflict that takes place.
So ultimately, if you're in a case where you're a shareholder of a company without a seat on the board, if you don't like what the board's doing, your right is to fire the board through a vote and replace the board. If you have got a shareholder who has the right to sit on the board, then in that role they have to act in the best interest of the company, not in their own best interests, but they do get a little bit more voice because they have a seat at the table. And then the framework document around the constitution, the charter of the board, those sorts of things will describe, for example, how decisions are made. Are they made by unanimous decision, or are they made by majority vote? And so a controlling shareholder could get a little bit more control of the board through how the charter is set up and so forth. So if you're in a growing business where you're initially one shareholder and you're bringing another shareholder in, that's the time to think about these issues, right? How do I want to maintain control, or do I want this independence to come in and actually keep me on the straight and narrow? And if so, make sure your constitution's set up appropriately, and make sure your charter's set up appropriately. And
your shareholders' agreement. Now, and often it's not these days, the constitution can contain the shareholders' agreement, depending on the structure of the entity. But you have to be very careful and very sure about ceding part control to a third party, that because you don't know what you don't know. And with the best will in the world, there are some entities that have been set up and taken in third parties where it just hasn't worked. So there needs to be a very close alignment of values, and those values need to be expressed in the relationship between parties and reflected in the shareholders' agreement. So it may take some time to come to terms with the shareholder agreement, and if it doesn't work, don't force it. If someone's values are not aligned with yours, it's not a good idea to give them shares just because they've got capital, or just because they've got some particular expertise in the short term. You really have to be.
From the other side of it, being that minority shareholder stepping into the business, the same thing, right? Leather buyer beware. So, as you say, an alignment of values, making sure that you're both after the same thing. You think about being on both, whether you're the minority shareholder or the original business owner selling down shares. You got to make sure that both parties are looked after in this relationship, like any business relationship, really, right?
I mean, a lot of it's common sense, but to some extent we get caught up in the moment and the kind of pressures of business as usual and strategic decision making. So you just got to take your time and look at, be circumspect about the future.
So given those constraints that we've discussed, how do shareholders influence the direction of the company?
Well, formally they can do so at the AGM, of course.
Yes.
And shareholders are perfectly at liberty to communicate with each other and set up what they believe is some sort of lobby group or some joint memorandum of understanding, whatever. It's never a good idea to have subcultures, but it's unavoidable. The larger the company gets, and there's a divergence of opinion on where the company should go, you may well find that the directors are faced with competing entities, competing interests. So there's an inevitability in some ways about shareholders coming and going, just as non-executive directors come and go. But it still comes back to this transparency and this understanding amongst the parties that decisions are being taken for good and substantial reasons, and that if there is going to be jam tomorrow instead of jam today, it has to be done on a consensual basis.
Yes.
Otherwise, the shareholders will just get disgruntled and will not be conducive to supportive strategies, etc. So it's
as a
everyone's
shareholder,
different.
As a shareholder, you can always contact the company itself, the managing director or the CEO, someone on the board, and say, "Hey, look, I've got this idea," and put the idea forward. And if it's a good idea, then it might go somewhere. But always remember that as a shareholder, you also don't have complete information. No matter how transparent the company and the board is, you don't know all the details. So your idea may not be as good as you think it is.
Well, in that respect, I think good boards will always be receptive towards submissions from shareholders, whether at the AGM or between AGMs, and they should actually, like we did at Lifetime, we had town hall meetings, I think two or three a year, where we sat online mainly, but we had shareholders around us in the office, and we'll let them talk to the board and interrogate the board and ask the board, and often as not, my view basically is that directors who sit on the board and do nothing else are they're kind of old hat. You need to be more interactive. You need to know who the management people are. You need to walk the talk. Go out onto the floor at one of the meetings and just say hello to some of the folk in the office, and be present at if there's an annual conference or quarterly regional things. I did a couple of road shows for Lifetime with Tony Dodds, our quality assurance manager, in the lead up to licensing, and that was great because it wasn't only addressing the subject at hand, but it also gave the employees and the shareholders who were present a chance to speak directly to a board member.
Yes,
and that kind of interaction, I think, is invaluable.
Absolutely. Anybody that takes on ideas and thoughts from other people is only going to be stronger for it.
Of course,
absolutely. Well, just to wind up a little bit now, what is the best advice you've ever received about governance?
There's two of them, I think, from an old boy in Australia that had been around longer than he cared to mention. His advice was, if you think there's a conflict of interest, there is. So act accordingly. And not from him, but from another party, knowledge speaks and wisdom listens. I thought that was,
I like that.
For a chairman of the board, that's pretty damn good advice.
Absolutely.
Because, particularly as a chairman, you're not there to have your views heard or your opinions prevail. You're there to moderate, facilitate, and to draw together the ideas that are being promulgated.
I've heard, before the concept of the chairman speaking last.
Yes.
And a board that I'm on, we run according to Robert's rules, which are a set of rules that are based on British Parliament, which is where the whole concept of moving a motion and seconding and so forth comes from. And there's something in that that's often misinterpreted with this idea that the chairman is a casting vote, and that's actually a complete misunderstanding of the rules. The idea is that the chairman votes last, and the chairperson, and the chairperson only votes if their vote changes the decision. So if there's already a majority, the chairperson doesn't need to cast a vote because it's already passed. And so they only cast their vote if it's tied and they think it should pass, or if it's one vote from tying and they think it shouldn't pass to make it tie. Which, I mean, ideally in a board, of course, you want to go by unanimous decision anyway, so you shouldn't get to
don't always get that, but I take your point. One of the things that I kind of ground out in the past is that to have an even number of board members is not a good idea. To have the chairman with a casting vote is not a good idea.
That's not democratic. Why do you have one person with two votes?
Well, exactly. It's not a good idea because in essence, if it's 3-2, for example, on a 6-person board, and the chairman votes to make it 3-all, status quo prevails.
That's right.
Which is only what half of the
motion does not pass.
Voted for. So I'm all in favour of having an odd number of directors on the board, definitely.
Nice. So a final question for you then. What is the best advice you would give to a new director?
Well, I'll certainly be the last to talk in the chairman's role, but in terms of the director, I think listening is a skill set that if you've been in financial services for any length of time, it's a natural discipline that you acquire. But in that context, the ability to listen and to interact and to find someone who is more closely aligned to you than perhaps some of the other directors, whether it's by ethnicity or age or gender, whatever, because there's a natural interaction between people who have the same,
something in common.
Yeah, exactly. And to that extent, learning from others who've already been there, I think is and sure. Look, I did postgraduate qualification in corporate governance, been through the IOD course and corporate governance New Zealand, etc. So those are all fine foundations, but you'll start to learn about governance when you're actually sat on the board and looking at the agenda and making decisions and having everything organised the way that it should be for you to execute your duties properly. But listening certainly would be back to the knowledge speaks, wisdom listens.
Great.
Maxim,
Well, David Whyte, thank you very much for your time today. It's
You're
been
welcome,
a
Mark.
great conversation.
It's been a pleasure.
I look forward to catching up with you soon. I really enjoyed time with you, and we'll see you next episode.
Thanks very much.